The stars were dying, not in the way mortals imagine, with sudden bursts of light and fire glorious and brief, but in the quiet way that only the old can understand. The great suns of the Orethan dominion, swollen with age, burned not gold but red, their light dimmed and weary, spilling across 1,000 worlds like the fading embers of a funeral pyre. Entire systems drifted in cold shadow, their warmth stolen, their seasons ended forever. In the void between, the bones of fleets hung silent, rusted hulks orbiting dead moons, like the forgotten memories of an empire that once dared to believe it would never die. And in that silence, my friends, we must speak honestly with you. We truly love and care for you. Not in the empty way that rulers promise their people, but in the deep, human way that understands how rare it is for us to meet here, in this moment of shared breath and thought. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it there? Now grab your coffee and let's get started. At the heart of the dying light stood Orethan Prime, the throne world. Once, it had been called the Jewel of the Eternal Crown. Now its skies were choked with ash storms, its oceans poisoned with the runoff of 10,000 years of industry, its towers leaning like tired old men against the wind. Yet still it endured. For the immortal Archlord Vathar sat upon its throne, as he had since the Empire's first unification war. Vathar was a figure carved from shadow and light, his features unchanged across millennia. His immortality had been a gift once, or so he had thought, bestowed by the crown of the first kings, a relic so old that no living scholar knew its true origin. To his people, he was the unbreakable shield, the eternal emperor who had never yielded to time. But to Vathar himself, each century was a weight upon the soul, each death of a friend or foe, a stone laid on the mountain of memory. He sat alone in the throne hall, the chamber lit by the slow pulse of the planetary shield far above. Through the high fractured windows, he could see the Orethan sun sinking into the smog-hazed horizon, a dim red coin swallowed by ash. It was not the Empire's first sunset, nor would it be its last. But for the first time in 10,000 years, Vathar felt the strange, electric certainty that he was watching the beginning of the end. The petitions of the day had ended, but the weight of them clung to him like cold chains. Grain shortages in the outer colonies, pirate incursions near the ecliptic rim, a border war with the Altheran expanse that had somehow stretched into its second century. His advisors' voices still rang in his ears. We must tighten the food rations. We must raise the fleet tax. We must show strength. Always the same demands, always the same solutions that cost blood. Yet it was not war at the edges of the Dominion that troubled him most. It was the whispers here, at the heart. He could feel it in the way the High Council's eyes lingered on him, some with suspicion, others with pity, in the way the palace guard shifted uncomfortably at their posts, hands too often near their weapons, in the way the air tasted of secrets. There had been 3 assassination attempts this year. Publicly, they were blamed on pirates or fringe cults. Privately, Vathar knew better. Each assassin had worn Imperial steel, forged for the Royal Guard. He had not confronted his council yet. That would come. But to strike too soon would be to draw the knife across his own throat. Instead, he walked the long corridors of the palace in silence, his hands trailing against the cold stone walls, tracing the grooves carved by time and by the footsteps of rulers who had come before him. Outside, the bells of the Star Basilica tolled the evening prayer. The sound was low and heavy, as if mourning something already lost. In the Hall of Mosaics, he paused before a vast depiction of the Empire's founding. A younger Vathar, sword raised, leading his people into a golden dawn. The tiles glittered faintly in the failing light, but cracks now split the scene, jagged black lines that cut through his painted face like scars. A shadow moved behind him. Your Radiance. It was Serathin Kale, his high general and the most decorated warrior of the Dominion. The man knelt, as tradition demanded, but there was something in his voice, too measured, too calm, that put Vathar's mind on edge. The council grows restless, Kal said. They speak of reforms, of succession. There is no succession, Vathar replied without turning. While I draw breath, there is only the throne. Kal's eyes, sharp as a blade's edge, flickered with something unreadable. Of course, my lord. But breath can be fleeting, even for one such as you. The words lingered between them, like the echo of a drawn sword. Then Kal rose, bowed once more, and left without another sound. Vathar remained, staring at his younger self in stone and glass, and wondered if the cracks had always been there waiting for his eyes to notice. Far above Orethan Prime, in the cold dark between the stars, a fleet drifted silently toward the capital. Its hulls bore no banners, its guns were primed, and in its lead vessel a message was already being prepared, not to the Empire, but to Vathar himself. The first blow would not be struck on the battlefield. It would be struck here, in the heart. The dawn over Orethan Prime was thin and brittle, the light filtering weakly through the high spires as if reluctant to touch the world below. The city lay beneath a veil of grey haze, streets silent save for the distant thrum of the orbital docks. Vathar rose from the throne not to welcome the day, but to endure it. In the centuries of his rule, mornings had been marked by ceremony. Banners unfurled, trumpets sounding, courtiers gathered in gilded halls, but the old traditions had frayed like ancient tapestries left too long in the sun. Today, the hall of petitioners stood half empty. Even the marble seemed dull, its polish worn away by uncountable years of petitioners' footsteps. The first to approach was Serathin Kale, his armour gleaming, the black and gold of the Dominion still proud upon his shoulders. Behind him came Lirin Vale, High Councillor, her robes cut from deep cerulean cloth embroidered with silver constellations, the old colours of Orethan diplomacy. Vathar's eyes flicked between them. Once they had been his right and left hands, Kale the sword, Lirin the voice. Now he sensed something colder between them, a distance measured not in steps, but in intent. The outer colonies are restless, Lirin began, her voice carrying the soft cadence of 1,000 political assemblies. They question the necessity of sending their fleets to the ecliptic front. Resources are stretched thin, my lord. They will obey, Vathar said simply. They will obey, she echoed. But at what cost? Already there are whispers in the trade syndicates. Dissent wrapped in polite words. Kyle stepped forward, the steel in his tone cutting clean through her diplomacy. Then we silence those whispers. A decisive show of force would remind them of the throne's reach. Vathar studied them both. Lirin's gaze held quiet warning. Kyle's burned with unspoken challenge. Force, Lirin said, turning her eyes toward Kyle, has its place. But the Dominion is not held together by swords alone. There are treaties older than you or I, General. To tear them now could ignite more than you intend. And to let the rot spread, Kel replied, is to wake one day and find the whole tree dead. Their words clashed like steel, and Vathar let them. For in their argument, He heard the Empire's heartbeat, uneven, strained, and close to faltering. When the chamber emptied, Lirin lingered. She stepped closer, lowering her voice until it was barely more than breath. Vathar, you must watch Kyle. He has changed. Everyone changes, he murmured. Not like this. She paused, searching his face. He's meeting privately with members of the Ecliptic Concord. The name was a spark in dry tinder. The Ecliptic Concord had once been a coalition of reformers, scholars, and exiled nobles. But in recent decades, it had hardened into something sharper, something hungrier. They spoke of remaking the Dominion into a leaner, more efficient empire. Behind closed doors, some whispered of dismantling the throne entirely. Vathar's jaw tightened. Do you have proof? Only my instincts. But you taught me long ago. The blade you cannot see is the one that kills you. Her words followed him long after she left. That night, the city lights below the palace burned dim. Vathar stood on the balcony of the upper halls, looking out at the sprawl of Orethan Prime. The wind carried the smell of burnt oil from the factories, and far to the east, the storm fronts rolled in over the Iron Sea. He remembered the days when he had walked those streets unguarded, when citizens had knelt not out of fear, but reverence. Now even their silence seemed edged with suspicion. A message crystal awaited him on his desk. It bore no seal, but the moment his fingers brushed its surface, it flared with pale light, and Karl's voice filled the air. My lord, there are things I cannot speak within the council chamber. We must meet, privately. The security of the Dominion demands it. It was an invitation, or a trap, perhaps both. The next morning, they met in the Hall of Shields, a chamber lined with the relics of 1,000 campaigns. Karl stood before a display of his own, the blade he had carried in the First Pacification War. The council is divided, Karl began without ceremony. Half will follow you. Half would see you step down. The Concord grows bolder by the day, and if they strike first, the Dominion will burn. You speak as if they are the enemy, Vathar said, and yet I hear your name on their lips. Kyle's eyes narrowed. I have spoken to them, yes, but only to gauge their strength. And what did you find? That they believe you will not act. That they see you as tired, weary of the throne. Vathar felt the words land heavy. They were meant to wound, and perhaps to rouse. I will act when the time is right, Vathar said. Time, Karl replied, is the one thing we do not have. They stood in silence for a long moment. Outside, the storm broke, rain drumming against the high glass. The shields lining the walls gleamed wetly in the dim light, their surfaces reflecting fractured shapes. Two men, once brothers in arms, now shadows of trust. That night, in the outer ring of Orethan Prime, a signal pulse was sent from an encrypted transceiver. Its destination was hidden deep within the ecliptic rim. Its sender was Serethin Kale. The first fractures had begun. The storms over Orethan Prime did not end with the dawn. They lingered, draping the spires in veils of rain, their echoes rolling through the palace's vaulted halls. Within, the corridors of the inner court felt colder, narrower, as though the very stone sensed what was coming. Vathar's mornings had once begun with the quiet ritual of the royal archives, scrolls unfurled, reports read, matters of state weighed. Today, before the first light could pierce the high glass, the captain of his personal guard stood at his chamber doors, rainwater dripping from his cloak. There's been a breach, my lord. The words cut through the last shreds of Vathar's patience. Where? In the northern cloister. 2 of our sentries, dead, found at their posts. Whoever did it wore palace armor, palace armor. That meant either betrayal or theft, both equally poisonous. Vathar followed the captain through winding corridors to the cloister. The bodies lay still beneath thin shrouds, boots still wet from the rain. The scent of ozone clung to them, not the musk of blood, but the sharp bite of energy weapons. Whoever had struck had done so quickly, cleanly, without alarm. A third guard knelt near the archway, holding up a fragment of something small and metallic. Found this in the drainage channel, sire. Vathar took it. The fragment was part of an identity seal, its edges warped by heat. The crest etched into it was faint, almost erased, but not enough to hide its origin. The house of Vathar himself. Not theft, then. The killers had worn the royal mark. That night, the council chamber felt emptier than ever, the high-backed chairs casting long shadows across the marble. Liren Vale arrived late, her hood drawn low, her steps echoing in the silence. "They're testing you," she said before she'd even sat. "The Concord, or someone using their name. Striking here in the heart of your power is not an accident." Vathar studied her. "And yet you came alone." "No guard." Her lips curved into something not quite a smile. "If they meant to kill me, they would not warn me first." He didn't answer. From the shadows near the colonnade, Karl emerged, silent as the rain outside. He did not bow. "I've doubled the sentries. No one comes in or out of the inner court without my leave." Vathar's gaze lingered on him. "Even me?" Karl didn't flinch. "Especially you. If they want you dead, they'll try again. We make them bleed first." Liren's eyes hardened. "And if the assassin walks under your banner, Kale, will you still call it protection?" The tension between them was a taut wire, ready to snap. The rest of the council session was perfunctory. Murmurs of trade routes, fleet repairs, meaningless small decisions made to hide the great ones being avoided. But Vathar's mind was elsewhere, tracing the lines between the cloister killings, the fractured council, and Kale's growing boldness. When the chamber emptied, Vathar remained, alone save for the rain's steady drumming. He thought of the old days, when loyalty had been as unshakable as the stone walls around him. Now, even the stones felt ready to shift. That night, sleep did not come. He walked the upper galleries, the palace dark but for the cold light of the moon spilling through the arches. It was there he saw them, 3 figures in the distance, moving with a precision that spoke of training, not chance. Royal armor glinted faintly on their shoulders. Vathar froze in the shadows, watching as they passed silently through a service arch. No words, no hesitation. He followed at a distance, heart pounding not with fear, but with the sick weight of recognition. One of them moved like Kyle. They descended into the lower vaults, ancient halls that few entered now, where the air tasted of dust and secrets. Through a crack in the stone, Vathar saw them gather around a table, a small holomap flickering above it. The map showed Orethan Prime, and then, with a swipe, the outer colonies. One of the armoured figures leaned forward, tapping a sector on the map. The hollow shifted to show troop deployments, fleet positions, and the throne room itself. Vathar's breath caught. This was no mere reconnaissance. This was planning. He pulled back, careful not to let his shadow cross the light. But the sound of a boot scraping stone froze him. One of the figures had turned. For a heartbeat, Vathar thought he'd been seen, but the figure only looked toward the darkness for a moment, before returning to the map. By the time Vathar made his way back to the upper halls, the rain had stopped, The air felt colder still. Somewhere in the city below, life went on. Markets opened, ships departed. The machinery of empire turned. But here, in the heart of power, the knives were already drawn. And in his mind, a single truth crystallized, clear and sharp as the edge of a blade. The shadows in the inner court were not creeping in from outside. They were already here. The palace bells rang 3 times before dawn, the signal for an emergency council. Their hollow peals rolled across Orethan Prime like the heartbeat of a wounded giant. Vathar dressed quickly, his hands steady despite the churn in his stomach. He had not slept. The images from the lower vaults haunted him. He could still see the holomap's cold glow, the troop positions blinking like targets, and the figure who moved like Kyle. The throne room was already filled when he arrived. The councillors stood in small knots, their voices low, their eyes sharp. Karl stood by the great bronze doors, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, a gesture that could have been protection or threat, depending on how one chose to see it. At the far end, Liren Vale was speaking to 2 foreign envoys, her voice calm, but her shoulders tense. When she caught sight of Vathar, she inclined her head, but did not smile. "What's happened?" he asked, his voice carrying across the marble. Cal stepped forward. There was an attack in the southern docks. A shipment bound for the outer colonies was destroyed, 30 dead. Witnesses claimed the attackers wore the royal crest. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Someone spat the word treachery. Vathar's voice was iron. "And you believe this is the work of the Concord?" Kyle didn't answer immediately. "If it is, they've decided to stop hiding. If it's not, then the enemy is one of us." Before Vathar could respond, a sharp crack split the air. Not thunder, but the distinct discharge of a plasma rifle. The sound came from the upper gallery. Chaos erupted. Guards scrambled, weapons drawn. Vathar ducked behind the throne's dais as a second shot rang out, this one striking a pillar so close that the marble split in a spray of dust. Through the blur of motion, Vathar saw them. 3 armored figures in the gallery, faces masked, crests glinting on their shoulders. Royal crests. Kyle barked an order, and the guards surged toward the staircases. But the assassins didn't flee. They advanced. One leapt down from the gallery, landing with the heavy grace of someone trained for war. He moved through the chaos like a blade through silk, cutting down 2 guards before they could raise their shields. Vathar rose, drawing his sidearm. He had not fired it in years, but his aim was steady. His shot caught the leaping figure in the shoulder, spinning him sideways, but not stopping him. Liren's voice cut through the noise. "Vathar, behind you." He turned just as the second assassin vaulted the dais. Their blades met with a hiss, energy crackling along the edge of Vathar's weapon. The force of the blow drove him back against the throne. The assassin's visor caught the light, and for an instant, Vathar saw his own reflection. Then the figure tilted their head just slightly, and though the face was hidden, the movement was familiar. Too familiar. "Kyle," Vathar breathed. The assassin hesitated, just for a heartbeat, before striking again. But in that pause, the room shifted. Liren had drawn her own weapon, a slim, silver-barreled pistol older than the war itself, and fired. The shot hit the assassin in the side, sending him staggering back. Kyle, the real Kyle, was suddenly there, sword in hand, slashing the assassin's helmet free. The mask clattered to the floor. It wasn't Kyle's face beneath it, but it was one Vathar knew all the same. Captain Drain, one of Kale's own lieutenants. The room went silent, but for Drain's ragged breathing. Blood dripped from his armor, pooling on the marble. "Why?" Cal demanded. Drain's eyes met Vathar's, and there was no fear there, only cold certainty. "Because the throne rots, and you would let it spread." Before Cale could speak again, Dran bit down hard on something in his mouth. A thin hiss, the stench of burning metal, and then nothing. His body went slack, eyes glassy. Poison. The other two assassins were gone, melted into the chaos. The damage was done. The throne room, the heart of the Empire, had been turned into a battlefield. Vathar looked out over the faces of his council, seeing suspicion etched in every line. Not just suspicion of the enemy, but of each other. Lirin holstered her pistol, her voice low. "The first fracture has come. It will not be the last outside." The bells began to ring again. This time, they did not stop. The dawn bled red over Orethan Prime, as if the sky itself had been wounded in the night. Blood, old and fresh, stained the steps of the throne room where the echoes of gunfire still lingered, carried on the cold wind like a dirge for a dying empire. The city, vast and weary, seemed to hold its breath beneath the thick haze. Vathar awoke not in the luxury of his chamber, but in the Hall of Mosaics, surrounded by the faces of emperors long gone, silent witnesses to his unravelling reign. His hands trembled as he reached out to touch the cracked visage of his younger self. The sword raised in eternal defiance. He had always believed that time would serve him, that centuries could be commanded like armies. Yet here, at the dawn of his endless rule, he realized that even immortality was a chain forged of endless loss. The council was fractured. The assassination in the throne room had shattered any illusion of unity. Lirin Vale, once his trusted voice of reason, now moved with quiet urgency, rallying those who still believed in diplomacy and restraint. "Peace is not weakness," she told him, voice firm but edged with desperation. "We must find those who still stand for the Dominion's future before all falls into ruin." Serathin Kyle, his once unyielding sword, had vanished from the council chambers. Rumours whispered of his alignment with the ecliptic Concord, of secret pacts forged in shadow. His betrayal cut deeper than any blade. Outside the palace, the outer colony stirred. Governors declared loyalty to different banners. Fleets, once united, now orbited with suspicion, their commanders questioning orders, their weapons trained not on enemies, but on each other. Vathar's heart ached as he gazed out at the sprawling city below. The streets where children had once played were now filled with whispers of rebellion. Markets closed early, and the hum of industry faltered. The archives held forbidden texts, ancient tomes describing the cycles of empire, rise, apex, decay, collapse. The immortal ruler had read them in his youth with arrogance, believing the words distant myths. Now they felt like prophecy. In the private chambers, Vathar wrestled with his own doubts. Each decision pulled him between ruthless action and the desperate hope for peace. His immortality was no gift. It was a burden that forced him to witness the crumbling of everything he had built. He found himself haunted by the faces of those lost to time, friends who had fallen in battles long past, lovers who had aged and died, generations of citizens who would never know peace. The weight of betrayal bore down upon him like a suffocating shadow. One evening, beneath the dying light of a blood-red sun, Lirin returned to his side. "There is a gathering," she said softly, "a chance to reclaim the council's loyalty. But it will demand sacrifice." Vathar nodded, knowing the path forward was lined with shadows and broken promises. Outside, Distant explosions echoed through the atmosphere, signaling that the war within the Empire had truly begun. The immortal king looked once more to the fractured mosaic, where his younger self still stood defiant, sword raised against the dark, and he whispered to the silence, "How long before I am the ruin in the stone?" The great halls of Orithon Prime had grown cold, their grandeur fading under the oppressive shadow of distrust. Vathar moved through the corridors like a ghost tethered to a crumbling throne, each step a reminder of the isolation his immortality had wrought. Liren Vale's presence was a flicker of warmth amid the growing chill. She no longer wore the cerulean robes of diplomacy, but a mantle woven from steel and purpose, her eyes sharpened by the relentless tide of betrayal. She was both anchor and enigma, a reminder that loyalty was a fragile flame flickering in the storm. "Your radiance," she said one evening, voice low in the dim light of the strategy chamber. "The ecliptic concord gains ground in the outer colonies. They promise renewal, but at the cost of everything the Dominion stands for." Vathar's gaze rested on the holomap before them, a swirling galaxy marked with flickering red dots, each a flashpoint of rebellion or unrest. "And what of Kyle?" he asked, voice weary. "She moves like a shadow now, beyond the Council's reach. Some say he seeks to carve his own empire from the ashes." Liren's eyes met his. "You must decide if he is a traitor to be destroyed or a necessary evil." The line between friend and foe blurred until it was impossible to distinguish one from the other. In the silence that followed, Vathar's mind wandered to the price of immortality, the endless watch over a dying empire, the slow erosion of trust, the bitter taste of sacrifice. How many had fallen for a throne that no longer promised salvation but demanded surrender? His own heart felt heavy with regret. The faces of old allies haunted his thoughts, those who had stood beside him in the fires of unification, now reduced to whispers of treachery or silence. Outside, the skies darkened as another storm gathered, its furious winds a mirror to the tempest within the Empire. Soldiers marched in the streets below, their armor gleaming beneath the lightning's flash, yet their eyes held fear. Vathar knew the Empire was no longer a monolith, but a fractured mirror, each shard reflecting a different truth. The crown weighed heavier with every betrayal, every lost world. He reached for a relic on the table, a small worn sigil from the First War, its edges chipped but still radiant with ancient power. It was a symbol of unity once, now a relic of a forgotten promise. As Liren prepared to leave, she paused at the doorway, her voice almost a whisper. "The weight of shadows is the heaviest burden of all, my lord. Choose wisely, for every step forward may be your last." Vathar watched her go, alone again in the dimming light, and felt the crushing weight of eternity pressing down upon him. The Empire's heart beat faintly, a dying rhythm in the vast silence of the stars, and somewhere deep within, a seed of doubt took root, a whisper that even the eternal could fall. The sky above Orithon Prime had turned a bruised purple, roiling with tempest and fire, as if the heavens themselves mourned the Empire's descent. Beyond the city's crumbling walls, fleets clashed in the void, blazing trails of destruction and death that mirrored the chaos within. Vathar stood upon the battlements of the throne world, watching the distant flashes of war. His gaze was heavy with the weight of centuries and the burden of choices that had become knives twisting within his soul. The outer colonies bled beneath relentless assaults by the ecliptic concord, their rebellious fleets sweeping through star systems with terrifying efficiency. Yet it was not only enemies from without who threatened the Dominion's survival, Within the shattered council chambers, old alliances cracked and shattered like brittle glass. Liren Vale moved between factions, her silver tongue weaving fragile threads of unity. But even she could not mask the growing fractures, the quiet betrayals whispered in shadowed halls. Serathin Kyle, once the unbreakable sword of the Empire, had become a ghost in the court. His true allegiance remained a mystery. Some whispered he sought to seize power for himself. Others that he was the Concord's dark hand within the palace walls. Vaethar's heart ached as he recalled the man Kale had been. A brother in arms, a steadfast guardian. Now he was an enigma wrapped in shadow, a harbinger of the Empire's unraveling. The war beyond the stars was brutal, a maelstrom of plasma fire, shattered ships, and screaming men. Yet it was the war within, the battles fought in silence and betrayal, that gnawed at Vaethar's soul. One evening, as the purple storm raged overhead, Vaethar met with Liren in the war room, their faces illuminated by the flickering glow of tactical displays. "We must choose, Vaethar," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Fight the Concord in the open, or cut the rot from within before it consumes us all." He looked at her, the lines of fatigue etched deep upon his face. "And if the rot is inside me? If the crown I wear has become a prison of my own making?" Liren's eyes softened, but her resolve did not waver. "Then we break the chains before they choke the life from us." Outside, the storm crashed against the palace walls, a symphony of fury that echoed the turmoil within. In the depths of the palace, unseen hands moved to ignite the flames of civil war. Fleets once loyal raised banners of rebellion, governors declared independence, and spies slipped through the shadows like vipers. Vaethar felt the Empire slipping through his fingers, like grains of stardust lost to the void. As lightning fractured the sky, he whispered a prayer to the ancient gods of the throne, a plea for strength, for guidance, for redemption. But the stars offered no answer, only the cold, unyielding silence of the void. The halls of the palace no longer echoed with the sounds of ceremony or command. Instead, they whispered secrets, half-truths carried on breathless footsteps, promises broken before they were made. Each shadow seemed to watch, to listen, and to wait. Vaethar moved through these halls like a man adrift, weighed down not by the armor of centuries, but by the fragile trust that was all that remained. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, now flickered with the fatigue of one who has seen too many suns rise and fall. Liren Vale was gone from the council, her departure cloaked in mystery and whispered rumors of exile. Some said she had chosen the path of rebellion, others that she had been forced into silence by forces unseen. Her absence was a wound in the heart of the Dominion. Kyle's name was no longer spoken in polite company. The once celebrated general was now a symbol of division, a spectre haunting every conversation, every strategy. His movements were erratic, his allegiances unclear, his ambition a dark thread woven through the unraveling tapestry of empire. Amidst the turmoil, a new figure emerged. Captain Saren Valis, a soldier forged in the fires of outer colony skirmishes, loyal not to the throne, but to the idea of the Dominion reborn. His eyes burned with fervor, his words ignited the hearts of the disillusioned. In a hidden chamber deep beneath the palace, Vaethar confronted him. The air was thick with tension, the only light a pale glow from ancient glyphs etched into stone. "You speak of rebirth," Vaethar said quietly. "But what is a phoenix if it burns everything to ash?" Saren's gaze was unwavering. Sometimes a world must burn for new life to grow. The Dominion is a corpse clinging to power. We must cut the rot to save the heart. Vathar's hands clenched. The familiar ache of betrayal echoed through his bones, an immortal's curse to watch his creation crumble. Outside, fleets clashed in distant systems, the cries of war a constant undertone to the palace's decay. Inside, alliances shifted like sand, promises turned to dust. In the silence of his chamber, Vathar touched the sigil of his house, worn smooth by centuries of holding a crown that felt heavier with each passing day. He whispered to the stars, "How long before even the eternal must fall?" The silence before the storm was a suffocating thing, heavy with the weight of inevitability. Arethan Prime stood on the precipice of ruin, its glittering spires casting long shadows over streets swollen with unrest. The air itself seemed charged, as if the stars themselves held their breath in anticipation. Vathar sat alone in the war chamber, the holomaps flickering before him like phantoms of a once glorious empire. Each red flash marking a battlefield, each cluster a node of rebellion. The Dominion was fracturing, shattered into pieces that bled and clawed at each other for supremacy. Serathin Kael had declared open defiance, raising his banner high and calling forth those who sought a new order forged in fire and steel. His forces swelled with former loyalists turned insurgents, their battle cries ringing through the void like thunder. Lirin Vale, whispered to have returned from exile, was a spectre weaving webs of subterfuge among the fractured council, her allegiances murky and shifting with the tides of war. Vathar's heart, though immortal, felt the sharp sting of loss as brother fought brother, and cities burned beneath twin suns. The throne, once a beacon of unity, was now a target marked for destruction. A message arrived, crackling with urgency, a desperate plea from the outer colonies. Their governors had fallen to Kael's insurgents, their fleets either shattered or turned against the Dominion. Vathar's hands clenched around the message crystal, his knuckles white. His voice, when he spoke, was a hollow echo. The Empire dies tonight. In the war room, generals and advisors shouted over one another, each desperate to salvage what remained. Vathar's gaze settled on a lone figure standing at the room's edge. Captain Saren Valis, eyes aflame with revolutionary zeal. "Your radiance," Saren said, voice cold and certain. "This is the reckoning. Either you lead the rebirth, or the Dominion is consigned to oblivion." Vathar rose, his silhouette framed against the holomap's flickering light. "Then let the stars witness what the crown demands. Sacrifice, blood, and the end of an era." The battle to reclaim the throne had begun, not only against enemies without, but against the shadows within. The Empire's fate hung in the balance, teetering on the edge of oblivion. And as the first shots of civil war echoed through the galaxy, Vathar knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The skies above Arethan Prime burned crimson, rivers of flame tracing the paths of warships locked in deadly embrace. The air thrummed with the roar of engines and the sharp crack of energy weapons, a symphony of destruction echoing across the void. Vathar stood at the command dais, eyes fixed on the holomap, where glowing red blots spread like wildfire. The Dominion was no longer a single entity, but a fractured collection of factions locked in a desperate struggle for survival. Across the battlefield, loyalist forces clashed with insurgents led by Serathin Kael and bolstered by Captain Saren Valis's zealots. Friendships forged in the fires of conquest were shattered by betrayal. Brothers in arms became enemies sworn to annihilate one another. Vathar's heart, immortal but heavy, ached with every loss. The throne demanded sacrifice, but the cost was staggering. Entire worlds burned, millions perished beneath the relentless advance of civil war. In the strategy chamber, Liren Vale returned, her once steely resolve tempered by grief. "We must choose our battles wisely," she urged. "Each victory bought in blood risks fueling the fire of rebellion." Vathar nodded, the weight of command pressing down like the crushing silence of deep space. "And yet, we cannot yield." Not while the Dominion's legacy remains, reports arrived of brutal skirmishes on the planet's surface, trenches filled with the dead, cities reduced to ash, innocents caught in the crossfire. The line between hero and villain blurred until indistinguishable. In a rare moment of solitude, Vathar reflected on the cruel irony of his immortality. To live forever was to witness endless cycles of rise and fall, to bear the scars of 1,000 wars etched upon the soul. He grasped the sigil of his house, worn smooth from centuries of holding a crown that demanded more than power. It demanded the endurance of endless loss. As the battle raged, a single thought burned clear in his mind. The Empire might survive the war, but at what cost? The once grand halls of the palace were hushed, weighed down by a silence more terrifying than any battle cry. Arethan Prime's heart pulsed weakly beneath layers of deception and mistrust. Its people fractured as deeply as its rulers. Vathar walked alone through the shadowed corridors, each step echoing the growing emptiness in his soul. The faces that had once surrounded him, the trusted advisors, the sworn brothers, were now spectres, ghosts of loyalty lost to ambition and fear. Liren Vale's absence was a wound that refused to heal. Her departure had fractured the council further, splintering the already fragile alliances that kept the Dominion from descending into total chaos. Serathine Kale's name was whispered with equal parts reverence and dread. His rebellion had torn at the fabric of the Empire, turning friend against friend, brother against brother. Yet, his vision for a new order resonated with many. Those who believed the old regime was doomed. In the dim light of the war chamber, Vathar grappled with a bitter truth. The crown he bore was a prison forged of fractured trust and shattered promises. Each decision demanded a sacrifice, yet every choice seemed to drive the Empire closer to oblivion. A message arrived, cryptic, urgent, from a secret envoy. It spoke of a gathering, a clandestine meeting of those still loyal but wary. Hope flickered faintly in Vathar's chest, fragile as the last star in a dying constellation. He knew the road ahead would be littered with betrayal, sacrifice, and sorrow. The immortal burden was heavier than ever. In the quiet of his chambers, Vathar traced the sigil of his house, its worn edges a reminder of centuries past and wars endured. He whispered to the void, "How much must one lose to save what remains?" Outside, the Empire fractured further, its people caught in the storm of ambition, loyalty, and the relentless march of fate. The dawn crept over Arethan Prime like a pale spectre, casting long shadows through halls that had once thrummed with power. Now they echoed with the hollow steps of those left behind, leaders broken by war, alliances shattered like fractured glass. Vathar sat alone upon his throne, the weight of the crown heavier than ever before. The empire he had forged in fire and blood was unraveling, thread by fragile thread. The faces of those he once trusted, friends, brothers, kin, were now masks of betrayal and regret. Serathine Kale's insurgency had swelled into a tidal wave of destruction, tearing through loyalist ranks and claiming worlds with ruthless precision. His name was a curse on the lips of the faithful and a rallying cry for the disillusioned. Lirin Vale's return to the court was marked not by triumph, but by suspicion. Her motives, once clear as the cerulean sky, now clouded by secrets and unspoken deals. Whispers of her collusion with enemy factions bred distrust, fracturing the fragile unity further. Vaethar's mind raced with grim decisions. To strike at Kell meant risking total civil war. To negotiate meant conceding the throne's power, perhaps forever. The choice was a blade suspended over the Empire's heart. Outside, the once glorious city burned. Fires raged through markets and noble districts alike. The cries of innocence drowned beneath the thunder of war. The people bore the cost of ambition, paying with blood and shattered lives. In the solitude of the war chamber, Vaethar gazed at the sigil of his house, now cracked and dulled. It was a symbol of power, yes, but also a reminder of fragility, of how empires could fracture and fall. He whispered, "The crown is not a prize, it is a burden, and even the eternal cannot bear it unbroken." As the shadows lengthened, the empire held its breath, teetering on the edge of oblivion. The shattered crown gleamed cold in the dying light, a monument to a legacy unraveling beneath the weight of betrayal. The night sky over Orathan Prime was torn asunder by crimson flashes, each a grim herald of war's unforgiving hand. The Empire, once a beacon of strength and unity, now lay battered beneath the relentless storm of rebellion and betrayal. Vaethar stood atop the palace battlements, his gaze lost in the tumultuous sea of stars, a cosmos that had borne witness to endless cycles of rise and fall, creation and destruction. Tonight, the balance would shift once more. The council chamber was a crucible of tension, where once loyal voices now clashed like thunder, and every word was laced with suspicion. Lirin Vale, her cerulean robes now tarnished with the dust of battle and whispered lies, faced Vaethar with eyes hard as forged steel. "Your radiance," she said, voice sharp yet tinged with sorrow. "We stand on the edge of oblivion. To save what remains, sacrifices must be made." From the shadows emerged Serathin Kyle, his once regal bearing replaced by the grim resolve of a man who had tasted power's bitter truth. His blade, dark and jagged, glinted under the flickering light, a symbol of defiance and destruction. "This empire is dead, Vaethar," Kyle said, voice cold as the void. "It survives only in chains and fear. I offer freedom, rebirth from ashes." Vaethar's heart ached, not with rage, but with the sorrow of 1,000 years. And what of loyalty? Of the bonds we forged? Are they to be discarded like relics in the dust? Kyle stepped forward, the weight of their shared past heavy between them. Loyalty is a weapon wielded by the strong, discarded by the weak. The Empire's fate lies not in crowns, but in the will to remake the stars. The chamber trembled as the first shots rang out, gunfire mixing with the clang of blades. Allies turned enemies, and the battle for the Empire's soul ignited in a storm of blood and fire. In the chaos, Vaethar found himself face to face with Kale, old comrades now bound by destiny's cruel hand to oppose each other. Their blades clashed, sparks flying, each strike a testament to years of loyalty and betrayal entwined. Lirin watched from the shadows, her own choices a silent sacrifice, a pawn in a game where no one would emerge unscathed. As dawn threatened the horizon, the war's crucible burned bright, shaping fates, breaking hearts, and deciding the legacy of a throne that demanded everything. Vaethar's voice echoed in the tumult, a whisper amidst the storm. "Let the stars judge us all." The battlefield lay shrouded in ash and silence, broken only by the distant rumble of collapsing ruins and the laboured breaths of the few who remained. Arethan Prime, once a jewel of the galaxy, was now a graveyard of dreams and broken promises. Vathar knelt amidst the wreckage, the weight of his immortal years pressing down like a suffocating shroud. His hands trembled as they traced the jagged edge of his shattered sword, a relic of victories long past and sacrifices still to come. Around him, the remnants of his loyalists and rebels alike lay scattered, their blood staining the scorched earth. The line between friend and foe had dissolved into a bitter tide of loss. From the smoke emerged Liren Vale, her face etched with grief and resolve. "The cost has been unimaginable," she whispered, "but it is not yet over." Vathar's eyes met hers, pools of weariness and ancient sorrow. How many must fall before peace can be forged? How many betrayals endured before trust is reborn? Her answer was a bitter smile. Sometimes the greatest sacrifice is not a life, but the surrender of what we once believed. As the first light of a dying sun pierced the horizon, a shadow moved, a figure cloaked in the remnants of shattered loyalty. Serathin Kyle stepped forward, his once proud armor marred, but his eyes still burning with unyielding fire. "We have bled enough," Kyle said, voice heavy yet resolute. "The Empire must end to be reborn. I offer you a choice. Step down, relinquish the crown, and let new blood guide the future." Vathar rose slowly, his immortal frame weary but unbowed. "And if I refuse?" Kyle's blade gleamed in the dawn, but he did not raise it. Instead, he extended a hand, a fragile truce born of exhaustion and shared loss. In that moment, Vathar understood the true cost of immortality. Not endless power, but endless sorrow, endless witnessing of the fall of all he held dear. He grasped Kyle's hand, the two warriors bound by fate and sacrifice. The Empire would live on, not as it had been, but forged anew from the ashes of betrayal and blood. As the dying sun set on an era, Vathar whispered a final prayer to the stars. "May the weight of our choices be light upon the next generation." The stars above Arethan Prime burned cold and distant, their light a silent witness to the Empire's twilight. Once a beacon of unity and power, the throne world now lay quiet, its spires cracked and crumbling beneath the weight of centuries and betrayal. Vathar stood alone upon the highest balcony, gazing out over a city reclaimed by silence. The faces of the past lingered in his memory. Friends, enemies, lovers, each a fragment of a legacy woven with sacrifice and sorrow. Immortality had been his crown and his curse. To live beyond time's reach was to bear witness to endless cycles of rise and fall, to the fleeting nature of power and the permanence of loss. He traced the worn sigil etched into his gauntlet, its edges softened by the passage of countless years. The symbol once represented dominion and hope, now a relic of a bygone age. Around him, the remnants of the dominion stirred, scarred but resilient. New leaders rose from the ashes, their eyes filled with cautious hope and unspoken fears. The Empire would endure, but forever changed. Vathar's voice was a whisper carried on the evening breeze. Empires are not built to last forever. They are echoes, shadows cast across the void, and in their end lies the seed of new beginnings. He turned away from the fading light, stepping into the cool darkness of his chambers. The weight of the crown had been lifted, but the burden of memory remained. As the dying sun set beyond the horizon, Vathar closed his eyes, an immortal at last freed from the relentless march of time. The Empire's fall was not an end, but a beginning carved in sorrow and sacrifice. And somewhere in the vastness of the stars, the echo of its story would linger, whispered in the void, a testament to the cost of ambition and the fragile beauty of hope.